Honestly, sir, with that attitude, I'm surprised anyone tolerates you long enough to take your money. The words cut through the elegant atmosphere of Le Bernardin Noir like a sword through silk, causing every conversation in Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant to halt mid-sentence. Crystal glasses paused halfway to lips, forks suspended over plates of caviar, and the soft classical music seemed to fade into shocked silence. Sebastian Blackthorne, 34 years old, devastatingly handsome, and worth approximately $3.2 billion, sat frozen in his leather chair, his steel gray eyes wide with something he hadn't experienced in over a decade. Complete and utter shock. No one had spoken to him like that since never. The woman standing beside his table with a wine bottle in her hands looked as surprised by her own words as he did, her warm brown eyes widening as she realized what had just escaped her lips. But instead of immediately apologizing or cowering, under his legendary stare, Isadora Valentina lifted her chin with a defiance that made something dangerous spark in Sebastian's chest. She was beautiful in a way that made billionaires forget their bank accounts, curves that her server's uniform couldn't hide, honey-colored skin that seemed to glow in the restaurant's candlelight, and dark hair pulled back in a way that emphasized the graceful line of her neck. But it was her eyes that held him captive, intelligent, fierce, and completely unafraid of him. "What did you just say to me?" Sebastian's voice was deadly quiet, the tone that had made grown men weep during business negotiations and caused stock prices to fluctuate with a single syllable. Around them, the restaurant's patrons leaned forward like spectators at a gladiator match, cell phones already emerging to capture what promised to be either the most epic public meltdown or the most spectacular firing in New York social history. Isadora felt her heart hammering against her ribs like a caged bird, but 3 years of dealing with entitled customers had built up a reservoir of suppressed frustration that had just found its outlet. She was tired of being treated like furniture by people who thought money made them gods. "You heard me," she said, her Puerto Rican accent adding fire to her words as she set the wine bottle down with perhaps more force than necessary. "I said I'm surprised anyone tolerates your attitude long enough to take your money. Though I suppose when you're paying for a $2,000 bottle of wine, people are willing to overlook a lot of personality defects." The collective gasp from nearby tables was audible. Someone's mother clutched her pearls so hard she nearly broke the strand. A food critic openly gawked while already typing on his phone, probably live tweeting the social suicide happening before his eyes. Sebastian slowly rose from his chair, his 6'3" frame unfolding with predatory grace that made Isadora's breath catch despite her bravado. He was even more imposing standing up, all sharp angles and expensive fabric, with the kind of commanding presence that made people instinctively step aside when he walked through rooms. "Do you have any idea who you're talking to?" he asked, his voice carrying the weight of someone accustomed to absolute deference. "A customer who's been nothing but rude since the moment he sat down," Isadora replied, her professional smile never wavering even as her pulse raced. "You've snapped at 3 different servers, complained about the table temperature, sent back a perfectly good appetizer, and treated everyone here like we're your personal servants instead of human beings trying to do our jobs." Sebastian felt something crack in his chest. Not his pride, though that was certainly bruised, but something deeper. When was the last time someone had called him out on his behavior? When had anyone dared to tell him the truth about how he treated people? "I am Sebastian Blackthorne," he said, expecting the name to end the conversation the way it always did. "Congratulations," Isadora said dryly. "I'm Isadora Valentina, and I still think you have terrible manners." The silence that followed was so complete that the sound of a champagne cork popping at another table sounded like a gunshot. Sebastian stared at this impossible woman who had just verbal demolished him in front of half of New York's elite, and felt something he hadn't experienced in years, genuine fascination. She was magnificent in her anger, like a goddess of righteous indignation. Her cheeks were flushed with passion, her eyes blazing with conviction, and she was looking at him not with the calculated interest he was used to from women, but with honest, refreshing disdain. "You find my manners lacking," he said slowly, as if testing the concept. "I find your manners non-existent," Isadora corrected, then immediately wondered if she'd finally pushed too far. She'd just insulted one of the most powerful men in New York. She was definitely getting fired, possibly blacklisted from every decent restaurant in the city. But instead of the explosion of rage she expected, Sebastian did something that shocked everyone present, including himself. He began to laugh, not the polite chuckle of social situations, but a genuine, surprised bark of amusement that transformed his entire face. "Non-existent," he repeated, still chuckling. "My God, you're right. I've been absolutely horrible tonight, haven't I?" Isadora blinked, thrown off balance by his unexpected reaction. Yes, you have been. And you're the first person brave enough to tell me so," he continued, his gray eyes sparkling with something that looked dangerously like admiration. "Do you know how refreshing that is?" "Refreshing isn't the word I'd use," Isadora muttered, still braced for the inevitable consequences of her outburst. Sebastian stepped closer, close enough that she could catch the scent of his cologne, something expensive and masculine that made her head swim slightly. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped to an intimate register that made her pulse flutter despite her better judgment. "Have dinner with me," he said, the words coming out like a command softened into a request. "Not here, obviously. We've provided enough entertainment for one evening. Somewhere quiet where I can prove that I'm capable of decent conversation and better manners." Isadora stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" "Dinner, tonight, with me." Sebastian's smile was crooked and boyish, completely at odds with his usual predatory confidence. "Unless you think my personality defects are completely irredeemable." Around them, phones were recording, gossip columnists were salivating, and the social media posts were already writing themselves. Sebastian Blackthorne, asking out a server after she'd publicly humiliated him. It was the kind of story that would dominate headlines for weeks. Isadora felt the weight of every stare in the restaurant, the pressure of a moment that would either be the most romantic gesture of her life or the biggest mistake she'd ever make. This man was dangerous, not just because of his power and wealth, but because of the way he was looking at her now, like she was the most fascinating puzzle he'd never been able to solve. "Mr. Blackthorne," she said carefully, very aware that her next words would change everything. "I don't date customers." The disappointment that flashed across his face was quickly masked, but not before she caught it. "Of course. Professional boundaries. I understand." But Isadora wasn't finished. With a boldness that surprised even herself, she leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that only he could hear. "However," she said, her lips curving in a smile that was pure mischief, "I get off work at 11, and technically, once I'm off the clock, you won't be my customer anymore." The transformation in Sebastian's expression was worth every risk she was taking. His eyes lit up like sunrise over Manhattan, and when he smiled, really smiled, not the practiced expression he wore for cameras and board meetings, Isadora felt something fundamental shift in her chest. 11 o'clock, he repeated, as if committing it to memory. 11 o'clock, she confirmed, then straightened up and resumed her professional demeanor as if nothing had happened. "Now, shall I pour your wine, or would you prefer to continue? Providing dinner theater for your fellow diners?" Sebastian's laugh was rich and warm, drawing curious glances from around the restaurant. "Please, pour away." "And Isadora?" "Yes?" "Thank you for telling me the truth. I needed to hear it." As Isadora performed the wine service with hands that trembled only slightly, neither of them noticed the photographer in the corner capturing every moment, or the society reporter already crafting the story that would appear in tomorrow's gossip columns. All they knew was that in the space of 5 extraordinary minutes, A server's moment of brutal honesty had somehow created the most romantic beginning either of them had ever experienced. The question now was whether Sebastian Blackthorne could prove himself worthy of a woman brave enough to humble a billionaire with nothing but the truth. The Bentley Mulsanne waited outside Le Bernardin Noir like a sleek black panther, its engine purring with the kind of quiet power that cost more than most people's houses. Sebastian sat in the back seat, his fingers drumming against the leather armrest in a rhythm that betrayed his unusual nervousness. He'd closed billion-dollar deals without breaking a sweat, but waiting for a server to finish her shift had him more on edge than a hostile takeover. "Sir?" His driver Thomas ventured carefully. "Perhaps I should circle the block. We've been here for 2 hours." "We wait," Sebastian said simply, his gray eyes fixed on the restaurant's elegant entrance. He couldn't explain the magnetic pull he felt toward Isadora Valentina. Couldn't rationalize why her brutal honesty had affected him more than any business victory ever had. All he knew was that he needed to see her again. Needed to prove that the man she'd glimpsed beneath his arrogance was worth knowing. Inside the restaurant, Isadora moved through her closing duties with hands that trembled slightly every time she glanced toward the window. The black Bentley hadn't moved in 2 hours, a constant reminder that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't predict. Part of her, the sensible part raised by a grandmother who'd cleaned houses for wealthy families, whispered that she was making a colossal mistake. But the other part, the part that had always dreamed of something more than serving other people's dreams, was electric with anticipation. "Girl, you have lost your ever-loving mind," muttered Carmen, her fellow server and closest friend, as they cleaned the last tables together. "Sebastian Blackthorne, do you know what you're getting yourself into?" "Probably not," Isadora admitted, polishing a wine glass with more attention than it needed. "But Carmen, did you see the way he looked at me? Not like I was a conquest or a novelty, but like I was important." Carmen shook her head, but her expression was fond. "Honey, you've been reading too many romance novels. Men like that don't fall for girls like us. They collect us, use us, then move on to the next shiny thing." "Maybe," Isadora said quietly, then straightened her shoulders with determination. "But what if you're wrong? What if he's different?" "Then you better make him prove it," Carmen said fiercely, grabbing Isadora's hands. "Don't you dare settle for being his exotic adventure. You're worth more than that." At exactly 11 o'clock, Isadora emerged from the restaurant's staff entrance, having changed from her uniform into a simple black dress that hugged her curves in all the right places. She'd let her hair down, the dark waves falling around her shoulders like silk, and applied just enough makeup to enhance her natural beauty without hiding it. Sebastian was leaning against the Bentley when she appeared, having abandoned the back seat when his nerves made sitting still impossible. The sight of her took his breath away. She was even more stunning out of uniform, carrying herself with a confidence that made him forget every other woman he'd ever known. "You waited," she said, stopping just out of arm's reach, her voice carrying a mixture of surprise and something that might have been pleasure. "I said I would," Sebastian replied, his voice rougher than he'd intended. Up close, away from the restaurant's formal atmosphere, she was even more magnetic. There was something about her presence that made him feel more alive, more aware of everything around him. "You look stunning," doesn't begin to cover it. Isadora felt heat rise in her cheeks at his compliment, but she kept her voice steady. "Flattery already? We haven't even made it past the curb." "It's not flattery if it's true," Sebastian said, moving to open the car door for her. "And I promised you better manners, remember?" As the Bentley glided through Manhattan's gleaming streets, the silence between them thrummed with possibility. Sebastian had chosen a small, intimate restaurant in Brooklyn, far from the social spotlight where they'd first met, where they could talk without performing for an audience. "Why Brooklyn?" Isadora asked, watching the city lights blur past the tinted windows. "Because," Sebastian said, turning to face her fully, "I wanted to take you somewhere that felt real, somewhere we could be ourselves instead of who people expect us to be. The restaurant was a revelation, a tiny Italian place called Nonna's, where the owner's grandmother still made pasta by hand, and the wine came in mason jars instead of crystal glasses. It was the antithesis of everything Sebastian's world represented, and Isadora could see him visibly relaxing as they were seated at a corner table lit by flickering candles. "This is your idea of fine dining?" she teased, but her smile was warm. "This is my idea of honest food," Sebastian replied, surprising himself with the admission. "No pretense, no performance, just real." As the evening unfolded, layers began, peeling away from both of them like flower petals opening to sunlight. Sebastian told her about growing up wealthy but lonely, about building his empire to prove himself worthy of love he'd never received from distant parents. Isadora shared her dreams of opening her own restaurant, her fears of never being more than someone who served other people's ambitions. "You know what the worst part about tonight was?" Sebastian said over their shared tiramisu, his voice growing serious. "It wasn't the public humiliation or the broken engagement. It was realizing that Vivian was right. I had become exactly the kind of man I used to despise." "And what kind of man did you used to be?" Isadora asked softly, reaching across the table to touch his hand. The contact sent electricity shooting up both their arms. "Someone who believed that success meant nothing if you had no one to share it with," he said, his fingers intertwining with hers. "Someone who thought love was supposed to make you better, not just wealthier." "You could be that man again," Isadora whispered, her heart racing at the vulnerability in his eyes. "You already are, in moments like this." Sebastian lifted their joined hands to his lips, pressing a soft kiss to her knuckles that made her breath catch. "You make me want to be worthy of you." "You don't have to be worthy of me," Isadora said, her voice trembling with emotion. "You just have to be honest with me. Always." The drive back to Manhattan was charged with an intimacy that had nothing to do with physical attraction and everything to do with two souls recognizing each other across the vast distance of different worlds. When the Bentley pulled up outside Isadora's modest apartment building in Queens, neither of them wanted the evening to end. "I should go," Isadora said, but made no move to leave the car. "You should," Sebastian agreed, but his hand was still, holding hers. "This is crazy," she whispered, looking up at her building's fire escape where laundry hung like flags of surrender. "Completely insane," he agreed, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "We're from different worlds." "Different planets," Sebastian confirmed, his gray eyes never leaving her face. "I don't even know if I like you yet," Isadora said, but her smile betrayed her. "I'm terrified that I'm already falling in love with you," Sebastian replied with such honesty that it took her breath away. The confession hung between them like a bridge. Neither was sure they were brave enough to cross. Finally, Isadora leaned over and pressed a soft, sweet kiss to his cheek, the kind of kiss that promised everything and demanded nothing. "Good night, Sebastian Blackthorne," she whispered against his skin. "Good night, Isadora Valentina," he replied, her name a prayer on his lips. As she walked toward her building, Sebastian watched from the car until she was safely inside, his heart pounding with the knowledge that his life had just been turned completely upside down by a woman, brave enough to tell him the truth. Neither of them noticed the photographer hidden in the shadows, capturing images that would grace tomorrow's front pages with headlines screaming about the billionaire's mysterious new love interest. Neither realized that Sebastian's ex-fiancée, Vivian, was already plotting her revenge, furious that he'd moved on so quickly from their very public breakup. All they knew was that in one perfect evening, they'd found something worth fighting for, even if the whole world was about to try tearing them apart. The newspaper hit Sebastian's mahogany desk with the force of a grenade, the front page blazing with a photograph that made his blood run cold. There he was, captured in perfect clarity as he kissed Isadora's hand outside Nona's restaurant, with a headline that screamed, "Blackthorn's Rebound. Billionaire CEO seen with mystery server hours after public humiliation." "Sir," Marcus said. Carefully, his usual composure cracked with worry. "The phones haven't stopped ringing. Every gossip column, entertainment show, and financial news outlet wants a statement. Your board is demanding an emergency meeting, and Miss Moreau's publicist has already released 3 different versions of her heartbreak over your betrayal." Sebastian stared at the photograph, his jaw clenching as he read the accompanying article that dissected every moment of his evening with Isadora like vultures picking at carrion. They'd somehow obtained details about where they'd gone, what they'd ordered, even quotes from supposed sources close to the couple that were complete fabrications. "They called her a gold digger," he said quietly, his voice carrying a dangerous edge that made Marcus step backward. "They actually used those words about a woman who refused to let me pay for dinner." 20 miles away in Queens, Isadora was discovering that her small world had exploded overnight. She stood in her building's lobby, staring at the mob of photographers, and reporters camped outside her front door like an invading army. Camera flashes turned the morning into a strobe light nightmare, and voices shouted questions through the glass that made her stomach turn. "Miss Valentina, how long have you been sleeping with Sebastian Blackthorn? Is it true you're pregnant with his baby? What's your response to Vivienne Moreau calling you a desperate social climber?" Isadora's phone had been ringing non-stop, since 5 a.m., the screen lighting up with unknown numbers and text messages from reporters offering money for exclusive interviews. She'd turned it off an hour ago, but the silence felt almost worse than the chaos. "Mija," said Mrs. Rodriguez from apartment 3B, appearing beside her in the lobby with a cup of coffee and eyes full of maternal concern. "You can't stay trapped in here all day. Come through the back entrance to my place. I'll make you breakfast while this craziness dies down." But as Isadora followed her neighbor through the building's maze of back corridors, she realized with growing dread that this craziness was just beginning. At Le Bernardin Noir, the lunch service was in chaos. Every table was filled with reporters, socialites, and curiosity seekers, hoping to catch a glimpse of the server who'd captured Sebastian Blackthorn's attention. Patricia, the head server, was fielding phone calls from news outlets offering substantial sums for interviews with Isadora's co-workers. "She called in sick," Carmen lied smoothly to the third entertainment reporter who'd tried to bribe her for information. "And no, I can't give you her home address, phone number, or favorite coffee order." The truth was, Isadora hadn't called at all. Carmen had been trying to reach her best friend all morning, growing more worried with each call that went straight to voicemail. In his penthouse office, Sebastian made a decision that would either solve everything or make it infinitely worse. He grabbed his coat and headed for the elevator, ignoring Marcus's protests about board meetings and damage control strategies. "Sir, where are you going?" Marcus called after him. "To get the woman I love out of this mess I created," Sebastian replied, the elevator doors closing on his assistant's shocked expression. The word love hung in the air like a revelation. Sebastian had never said it out loud before, not about anyone, not in any context that mattered. But as his private elevator descended toward the parking garage, he realized with crystalline clarity that it was true. After one evening with Isadora Valentina, he was completely, irrevocably in love. The Bentley cut through Queens traffic like a shark through water. Sebastian's hands clenched in his lap as he watched the circus surrounding Isadora's building grow larger through the tinted windows. News vans lined the street, reporters clutched coffee cups and microphones, and camera crews had transformed her quiet neighborhood into a media battlefield. "Thomas, take us around the back," Sebastian instructed, his mind racing with plans to extract Isadora from this nightmare. But as they approached the building's rear entrance, Sebastian's phone exploded with an incoming call that made his blood freeze. The caller ID read simply, "Board Chairman." "Blackthorn," he answered, curtly. Sebastian. The voice of Richard Pemberton, the 70-year-old patriarch who controlled 30% of Blackthorn Industries' voting shares, carried the kind of cold fury that had toppled governments. My office, now. I'm in the middle of... I don't care if you're in the middle of brain surgery. Our stock price has dropped 12% since this morning's headlines hit. Our shareholders are panicking, our clients are questioning our stability, and the Henderson merger is hanging by a thread. You will be in my office in 30 minutes, or I will call an emergency board vote to remove you as CEO. The line went dead, leaving Sebastian staring at his phone with the sick realization that his moment of happiness was about to cost him everything he'd built. Meanwhile, in Mrs. Rodriguez's warm kitchen that smelled of café con leche and fresh bread, Isadora sat at a small table covered in cheerful yellow vinyl, her world crumbling around her like a house of cards. The television murmured in the background, every channel seemingly devoted to analyzing her life, her motives, her worthiness to breathe the same air as Sebastian Blackthorn. "They're saying I'm a fortune hunter," she whispered, her voice breaking as she stared at her untouched breakfast. "They found my student loan records, my work history, even interviewed my high school guidance counselor. They're turning my entire life into evidence that I'm some kind of calculating predator." Mrs. Rodriguez, a tiny woman with iron gray hair and eyes full of wisdom earned through 70 years of hard living, reached across the table to grip Isadora's hands. "Mija, listen to me," she said firmly. "I've lived in this building for 40 years. I've watched you grow from a scared little girl who moved in with her abuela into a strong woman who works 3 jobs to chase her dreams. I've seen you give your last $20 to help Mrs. Chen with her medicine, seen you stay up all night helping teenagers with their college applications. These people on TV, they don't know the first thing about who you really are." "But Sebastian will see all this," Isadora said, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "He'll see what they're saying about me, about us, and he'll realize that being with me isn't worth destroying his reputation. And if he does?" Mrs. Rodriguez asked gently. "If he chooses his reputation over you?" "Then I'll know that Carmen was right," Isadora whispered. "That men like him don't really fall for girls like me. They just think they do, until reality gets in the way." What neither woman knew was that at that very moment, Sebastian was sitting in Richard Pemberton's oak-paneled office, facing the most impossible choice of his life. "You have 2 options," Pemberton was saying, his fingers steepled as he delivered his ultimatum with surgical precision. "End this ridiculous infatuation with the server immediately, publicly, dramatically, and permanently, or watch everything you've built crumble around you. The board has no confidence in a CEO who makes headlines for picking up waitresses instead of closing deals." "She's not just a waitress," Sebastian said through gritted teeth. "Her name is Isadora Valentina, and she's worth 10 of anyone sitting on this board." "Perhaps," Pemberton replied coldly. "But worthiness doesn't matter in our world, Sebastian. Perception does. And the perception right now is that you're having a midlife crisis with the help. Our clients won't stand for it, our shareholders won't tolerate it, and I won't allow it to destroy everything your father built." The mention of his father was a low blow that hit its target perfectly. Sebastian's jaw clenched as he wrestled with impossible choices. The woman who'd awakened his heart, or the empire that defined his identity. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" he asked quietly. "Hold a press conference this afternoon. Announce that your evening with Miss Valentina was a moment of poor judgment following your broken engagement. Express regret for any embarrassment caused to her or your investors. Make it clear that there is no relationship, no future contact, and no romantic involvement of any kind." The words felt like poison in Sebastian's mouth. "And if I refuse, then you'll be removed as CEO by close of business tomorrow. Your shares will be diluted, your authority stripped, and your life's work will be handed to someone with better judgment. The choice is yours, Sebastian. Your company or your conscience." As Sebastian sat in that office, staring out at the Manhattan skyline he'd conquered through sheer force of will, He realized that all his wealth and power meant nothing if he had to choose between his achievements and his heart. But the most terrifying part wasn't the choice itself. It was the growing certainty that no matter what he decided, someone he cared about was going to get destroyed in the process. The press conference was scheduled for 3 p.m., but Blackthorne sat in his office at 2:30, staring at the prepared statement that would destroy the best thing that had ever happened to him. The words blurred together on the page like accusations. Regrettable lapse in judgment. No ongoing relationship. Professional boundaries. Each phrase felt like a betrayal of everything Isadora had awakened in him. "Sir," Marcus entered, quietly, his expression grim. "The media room is packed. Every major network, financial publication, and gossip outlet is here. They're expecting you to crucify her publicly." Sebastian crumpled the statement in his fist, his knuckles white with tension. Through his floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan sprawled below him like a kingdom he was about to lose, or a prison he was about to choose. "There has to be another way," he said, his voice raw with desperation. "Sir, with respect, there isn't. The Henderson merger alone is worth $2.3 billion. If we lose that deal because of negative publicity, I know the numbers, Marcus." Sebastian's voice carried an edge that made his assistant step back. "I know exactly what this is costing me. The question is whether I'm willing to pay the price." Meanwhile, in Queens, Isadora had made her own impossible decision. She couldn't hide in Mrs. Rodriguez's kitchen forever while Sebastian's world burned because of their one perfect evening. With trembling hands, she'd written a letter, old-fashioned pen on paper because everything digital felt too permanent, for words this painful. "Mija, you don't have to do this," Mrs. Rodriguez said gently, watching Isadora seal the envelope with hands that shook like autumn leaves. "Yes, I do," Isadora replied, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "I won't be the reason he loses everything he's worked for. He deserves better than that. He deserves better than me." The letter was simple, devastating, in its selflessness. "Sebastian, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. Not because I don't care about you. God knows I've never felt anything like what I felt in your arms. But because I care too much to watch you destroy your life for someone. Like me. You were right when you said we're from different worlds. I was foolish. To think love could bridge that gap. Your world demands perfection, and I'm beautifully, irrevocably flawed. Don't look for me. Don't try to contact me. Let me be your cautionary tale, your reminder of why billionaires don't fall for servers. Find someone worthy of your empire, someone who can stand beside you in boardrooms and at galas without causing stock prices to plummet. Thank you for one perfect night where I felt like a princess in a fairy tale. Now it's time to wake up. Forever yours, in another life, Isadora. She'd given the letter to Mrs. Rodriguez's grandson Diego, a bike messenger who promised to deliver it to Blackthorne Industries within the hour. By the time Sebastian read her goodbye, she'd be on a Greyhound, bus to Miami, where her cousin Maria had offered her a job and a fresh start far from the media circus. At 2:45 p.m., Sebastian stood before his bathroom mirror, adjusting a tie that felt like a noose. In 15 minutes, he would walk into that press room and speak words that would save his company and destroy his soul. He'd spent his entire adult life making hard choices, but nothing had prepared him for this moment of choosing between everything he'd built and the only woman who'd ever seen past his wealth to the man underneath. His phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Diego Hernandez here with urgent delivery. Says it's from IV." Sebastian's heart stopped. IV Isadora Valentina. He raced from his office, his expensive shoes sliding on marble floors as he sprinted toward the reception area. Diego, a young man in bike gear, looked nervous as he handed over the sealed envelope. "She said to make sure you got this before 3 p.m., Diego said. Said it was important." Sebastian's hands trembled as he tore open the envelope, his eyes scanning Isadora's careful handwriting, With each word, his heart broke a little more, her sacrifice carving itself into his chest like a brand. She was leaving. She was walking away to save him from having to choose. "Where is she?" Sebastian demanded, grabbing Diego's shoulders with desperate intensity. "Man, I don't know. She just gave me the letter and said she had a bus to catch." Sebastian was already moving, his mind racing through possibilities. Bus stations, airports, train terminals. She could be anywhere in the city. But something in her letter, the mention of starting over, made him think of departures rather than arrivals. "Marcus!" he shouted into his phone as he ran toward the elevator. "Cancel the press conference. Tell them I'm dealing with a family emergency." "Sir, you can't. The board can go to hell!" Sebastian snarled, punching the elevator button repeatedly as if that would make it arrive faster. "Get me every bus departure from every terminal in the city for the next 2 hours. And get my car ready. We're going hunting." At Port Authority Bus Terminal, Isadora sat in the departure lounge, her single suitcase at her feet, and her heart in pieces. The 3:15 bus to Miami would board in 20 minutes, carrying her away from the only man who'd ever made her feel like she was enough. Around her, travelers rushed with purpose toward their destinations, but Isadora felt suspended in amber, trapped between a past she couldn't return to and a future that felt like exile. Her phone, turned off since morning, sat silent in her purse like a dead thing. She'd bought a newspaper from the terminal shop, Sebastian's face staring back at her from the front page with the headline, "Blackthorn's $1 billion choice, love or money." The article speculated about his upcoming press conference, about whether he'd publicly distance himself from the server scandal to save his company. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was making his choice for him. "Now boarding bus 447 to Miami," the loudspeaker announced, the words echoing through the terminal like a funeral dirge. Isadora stood slowly, her legs unsteady as she picked up her suitcase. This was it, the moment she walked away from the fairy tale and back into real life. She'd had her one night as Cinderella. Now the clock had struck midnight. She was 3 steps from the boarding gate when she heard it, a voice she'd recognize in a crowd of thousands, rough with desperation and raw emotion. "Isadora." She turned, her suitcase tumbling from numb fingers, to see Sebastian Blackthorn running through Port Authority like a man possessed. His perfect hair was disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled, and his eyes held a wild panic that made her heart stop. The entire terminal seemed to freeze as Manhattan's most powerful man sprinted through the departure lounge, dodging travelers and luggage carts with single-minded determination. Camera phones appeared like magic, capturing the billionaire's very public pursuit of the woman he was supposed to renounce. "Don't get on that bus," Sebastian said when he reached her, his chest heaving as he struggled to catch his breath. "Please, Isadora, don't leave me." "You're supposed to be at a press conference," she whispered, her eyes filling with tears. "You're supposed to be choosing your company over me." "I already made my choice," Sebastian said, his hands framing her face with a tenderness that made her knees weak. "I chose you. I'll always choose you." Around them, fellow passengers had stopped boarding to watch the drama unfold. Security guards hovered uncertainly, unsure whether to intervene in what looked like a very public romantic crisis. "Sebastian, no," Isadora said, her voice breaking. "You'll lose everything. Your company, your reputation, your future." "What? Future?" Sebastian interrupted, his gray eyes blazing with conviction. "What's the point of building an empire if I have no one to share it with? What's the point of having everything if I lose the only thing that matters? Your board will destroy you," she protested weakly, even as her heart soared at his words. "Then we'll build something new," Sebastian said simply. "Together. I don't need Blackthorn Industries to be happy, Isadora. I need you." "Final boarding call for bus 447 to Miami," the loudspeaker announced. Sebastian's hands tightened on her face, his voice dropping to an intimate whisper that only she could hear. "Come home with me. Not to my penthouse, Not to my world of galas and board meetings, but home. Wherever that is, as long as you're there. Isadora stared into his eyes, seeing the truth of his words reflected in their gray depths. He was choosing her, not just over his company, but over everything his old life represented. The weight of that sacrifice was staggering, but so was the pure love she saw in his expression. "Are you sure?" she whispered. "Are you absolutely certain? Because once I say yes, once I choose you two, there's no going back. We'll face everything together. The media, your board, the whole world trying to tear us apart." Sebastian's smile was radiant, transforming his entire face as he leaned his forehead against hers. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life. You're worth every risk, every sacrifice, every battle we'll have to fight." "Then yes," Isadora breathed, her own smile breaking through her tears like sunshine after a storm. "Yes, I choose you too." The kiss that followed was captured by dozens of camera phones, but neither of them cared. In that moment, surrounded by strangers in a bus terminal that smelled of diesel fuel and broken dreams, Sebastian Blackthorne and Isadora Valentina created their own perfect world. One where love conquered empires and fairy tales came true for those brave enough to fight for them. The bus to Miami departed without Isadora, but she was exactly where she belonged, in the arms of a man who'd proven that some things were worth more than all the money in the world. The video went viral within 6 hours. Sebastian Blackthorne, Manhattan's most ruthless CEO, running through Port Authority bus terminal like a man possessed, declaring his love for a server in front of hundreds of witnesses. By evening, Billionaire Chase was trending worldwide, the footage replayed on every news channel from New York to Tokyo. But while the internet celebrated their fairy tale romance, Sebastian's corporate world was preparing for war. "You've lost your goddamn mind," Richard Pemberton snarled, his usually composed demeanor shattered as he paced Sebastian's office like a caged predator. The emergency board meeting had been called for 8 a.m. the following morning, barely 12 hours after. Sebastian's very public declaration at the bus terminal: "The Henderson deal is dead, completely, catastrophically dead. 3 major clients have terminated their contracts overnight. Our stock price has dropped 28%, and the financial press is calling for your head on a silver platter." Sebastian sat behind his desk, Isadora's hand firmly clasped in his, drawing strength from her presence. She'd insisted on being there for this conversation, refusing to let him face the consequences alone. "Then let them call for it," Sebastian said calmly, his gray eyes steady. "I've made my choice, Richard. I'm not changing my mind." "Your choice?" Pemberton's laugh was bitter and cold. "Your choice has cost this company billions, Sebastian. Your father is rolling over in his grave." "Don't." Sebastian's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "Don't you dare bring my father into this. He built this company, but he also died alone in an empty penthouse with no one who loved him for anything but his bank account. I won't make the same mistake." Isadora squeezed his hand, her heart breaking for the pain she heard in his voice. She'd learned about Sebastian's father the night before. A brilliant businessman who'd accumulated vast wealth and profound loneliness, in equal measure. "Mr. Pemberton," Isadora said quietly, her voice carrying a strength that made both men look at her with surprise. "I understand you're angry. I understand that my relationship with Sebastian has caused problems for this company. But what I don't understand is why you think destroying the happiness of a good man will somehow fix those problems." Pemberton's eyes narrowed as he studied her with the calculating gaze of a predator sizing up prey. "Miss Valentina, with all due respect, you have no idea what you're talking about. This isn't about happiness. It's about responsibility. Sebastian has obligations to thousands of employees, shareholders, and clients. His personal feelings are irrelevant." "Are they?" Isadora stood, her petite frame somehow commanding the room's attention. "Because from where I'm sitting, It looks like this company's problems have less to do with Sebastian's love life, and more to do with a board of directors who value stock prices over human decency. The silence that followed was electric with tension. Pemberton's face flushed red with rage, while Sebastian stared at Isadora with something approaching awe. She was magnificent in her fury, a warrior princess defending her chosen king. "You have until tomorrow morning," Pemberton said. Finally, his voice deadly quiet. "Resign voluntarily, or face a vote of no confidence. Either way, Sebastian, your time as CEO ends at 9 a.m. After Pemberton stormed out, Sebastian and Isadora sat in the sudden quiet of his office, the weight of the ultimatum settling around them like fog. "I'm sorry," Isadora whispered, tears threatening to spill. "This is all my fault." "No," Sebastian said fiercely, pulling her into his arms. "This is not your fault. This is 30 years of building a life that looked impressive from the outside, but felt empty on the inside. You didn't destroy my old life, Isadora. You saved me from it." But even as he held her, Sebastian's mind was racing. He'd built Blackthorn Industries from the ground up after his father's death, pouring every ounce of his intelligence and ambition into creating something lasting. The thought of losing it, not just the money, but the legacy, felt like losing a limb. "What if we fought back?" Isadora said suddenly, pulling away to look at him with eyes that blazed with determination. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if instead of letting them destroy you, we showed them exactly what they're losing? What if we proved that a CEO with a heart is worth more than one who's just a calculating machine?" Meanwhile, across town in her Upper East Side, penthouse Vivienne Moreau was orchestrating her own campaign of destruction. The supermodel had spent the past 24 hours giving exclusive interviews to every major publication, painting herself as the wronged woman, and Isadora as a manipulative social climber. "It's heartbreaking, really," Vivienne told the cameras with practiced tears glistening in her perfectly made-up eyes. "To think that Sebastian would throw away everything we built together for some random girl he met in a restaurant. It shows how lost he's become, how desperately he needs help." Her publicist, a sharp-eyed woman named Miranda Cross, nodded approvingly from behind the cameras. They'd crafted Vivienne's narrative carefully, the concerned ex-fiancé worried about Sebastian's mental state, the victim of his midlife crisis. "The board will love this," Miranda murmured. "You're giving them the perfect excuse to remove him while looking like the hero trying to save him from himself." But Vivienne's revenge wasn't just about public relations. She'd been making phone calls all morning, to clients, investors, anyone with influence over Blackthorn Industries. Her message was always the same. Sebastian Blackthorn was having a breakdown, making erratic decisions that put their investments at risk. What neither woman realized was that their campaign was about to backfire spectacularly. At 6 p.m. that evening, Sebastian and Isadora arrived at a small community center in Brooklyn, where Sebastian was scheduled to speak at a financial literacy workshop for young entrepreneurs. It was an event he'd committed to months ago, part of a program he'd quietly funded to help underprivileged kids start their own businesses. The media had expected him to cancel, to hide away while his corporate world crumbled. Instead, they found him walking hand in hand with Isadora into a room full of teenagers who looked at him not as a scandal-plagued billionaire, but as a mentor and inspiration. "Mr. Blackthorn," called Maria Santos, a 17-year-old who'd used his program's microloans to start a successful tutoring service. "Is it true you're giving up your company for love?" Sebastian smiled, the question cutting straight to the heart of everything he'd been wrestling with. "Maria, let me ask you something. If building your tutoring business meant you could never help another student, never make a real difference in someone's life, would it still be worth doing?" "No," Maria said immediately. "The business is just a tool. The purpose is what matters." "Exactly," Sebastian said, his voice carrying new conviction. "A company is just a tool. The purpose, creating jobs, building something meaningful, making the world a little better, That's what matters. And I've learned that you can't make the world better if you forget how to love the people in it. As Sebastian spoke about business, ethics, social responsibility, and the importance of staying true to your values even when it costs you everything, something extraordinary happened. The room full of teenagers began filming on their phones, sharing his words on social media with captions like, "This is what a real leader looks like," and "a CEO who actually cares." By the time the workshop ended, Sharka Real Leader was trending alongside Billionaire Chase, and the narrative was shifting in ways no one had anticipated. But the real surprise came at 8 p.m. when Sebastian's phone rang with a call that would change everything. "Mr. Blackthorne?" The voice was young, nervous, but determined. "This is David Chen, CEO of Chen Tech Solutions. I saw your speech tonight, and I wanted you to know that our company is pulling our contracts from any business that treats their employees like expendable resources. We want to work with leaders who understand that people matter more than profit, margins." The call was followed by another, then another. Small companies, startups, even some mid-sized corporations, all inspired by Sebastian's words at the community center, all wanting to align themselves with his vision of ethical business practices. By midnight, Sebastian had received commitments for over $800 million in new business from companies that valued his integrity over his compliance with traditional corporate culture. "It's not enough to save Blackthorne Industries," Sebastian told Isadora as they sat in his penthouse, surrounded by documents and laptop screens showing the social media storm his speech had created. "But it's enough to start something new, something better." "What are you thinking?" Isadora asked, though she could see the spark of inspiration in his eyes. "I'm thinking," Sebastian said, pulling her close, "that maybe losing everything I thought I wanted is exactly what I needed to find everything I actually want." The next morning's board meeting would still happen. Pemberton would still try to destroy him. But Sebastian Blackthorne was no longer the man who'd built his worth on other people's approval. He was a man who'd found something more valuable than any empire, a partner who believed in him, a purpose that mattered, and the courage to build a legacy based on love instead of fear. The war for his future was just beginning, but for the first time in his life, Sebastian knew he was fighting, for the right reasons. The Blackthorne Industries boardroom had never seen anything like it. At exactly 8:59 a.m., Sebastian Blackthorne walked through the mahogany doors with Isadora Valentina at his side, followed by an entourage that made Richard Pemberton's face turn the color of old parchment. Behind them came David Chen of Chen Tech Solutions, Maria Santos from the community center, Carmen from the restaurant, Mrs. Rodriguez from Isadora's building, and dozens of other people whose lives Sebastian had touched. "What is the meaning of this circus?" Pemberton snarled, his composure cracking as cameras from 3 major news networks filed into the room behind Sebastian's supporters. "This," Sebastian said calmly, taking his seat at the head of the conference table while Isadora stood proudly beside him, "is democracy in action. You called a public vote of no confidence. I'm making sure the public gets to see exactly what they're voting on." The board members shifted uncomfortably as cameras positioned themselves around the room. This was supposed to be a private execution, not a televised trial. "Sebastian," Pemberton said through gritted teeth, "you're making a mockery of corporate governance." "No, Richard, I'm making it transparent." Sebastian's voice carried new authority, not the cold command of fear, but the warm strength of genuine leadership. "For too long, this board has operated like we own this company. But we don't. We serve it. We serve the employees, the clients, the communities we impact, and they deserve to see how we make decisions that affect their lives." Maria Santos stepped forward, her young voice carrying clearly through the room. "Mr. Pemberton, sir, I started my business with a loan from Mr. Blackthorne's youth entrepreneurship program. I now employ 12 people in my neighborhood. Are you really going to fire the man who made that possible because he fell in love?" "This is highly irregular," board member Harrison Whitfield began. "So is firing a CEO for having a heart?" interrupted Carmen, her server's uniform replaced by a crisp business suit that Isadora had helped her choose. "I've worked in restaurants for 15 years. I've served a lot of powerful men. Most of them treat the staff like furniture. Sebastian Blackthorne is the first one I've ever seen who looks at service workers like we're human beings worthy of respect." David Chen opened his laptop, the screen displaying contracts and financial projections. "Mr. Pemberton, since yesterday evening, 23 companies have committed to transferring their business relationships to whatever entity Mr. Blackthorne leads next. The total value is $1.2 billion. The corporate world is watching this vote, and they're making their own choices about what kind of leadership they want to support." The room buzzed with whispers as board members realized the implications. They weren't just voting on Sebastian's future. They were voting on the company's survival. But Pemberton wasn't finished. "This is all very touching," he said with venomous sarcasm. "But it doesn't change the facts. Sebastian's personal behavior has cost this company billions. His judgment is compromised. A CEO who chases servers through bus terminals is not fit to lead a Fortune 500 company." The words hung in the air like a slap, and Isadora felt every eye in the room turn to her. This was the moment she'd been dreading, being reduced to a punchline, a symbol of Sebastian's supposed poor judgment. But instead of shrinking away, Isadora Valentina did something that no one in that boardroom expected. She laughed. "You're absolutely right, Mr. Pemberton," she said, her voice carrying the musical confidence of someone who'd found her power. "A CEO who chases servers through bus terminals isn't fit to lead a Fortune 500 company. He's fit to lead something much more important, a revolution." She moved to stand beside Sebastian, her hand finding his with natural grace. "You want to talk about judgment? Let's talk about judgment." Sebastian saw something in me that I didn't even see in myself. He saw potential, intelligence, worth. Not because of my bank account or my connections, but because of who I am as a person. That's not poor judgment, gentlemen. That's the kind of vision that builds empires. Isadora turned to face the cameras, her presence commanding the room with quiet authority. "My name is Isadora Valentina. 3 days ago, I was a server at Le Bernardin Noir. Today, I'm the co-founder of Elevation Enterprises, a company dedicated to ethical business practices and social responsibility. Our first client? Chen Tech Solutions. Our first project? A microloan program for women entrepreneurs that will create over 500 jobs in underserved communities." The boardroom erupted in surprised murmurs. Sebastian stared at Isadora with undisguised admiration. She'd been planning this reveal all morning, using her natural intelligence and business instincts to create something beautiful from the ashes of his corporate downfall. "You see," Isadora continued, her voice growing stronger with each word, "you've been asking the wrong question. The question isn't whether Sebastian Blackthorne is fit to lead your company. The question is whether your company is worthy of Sebastian Blackthorne's leadership." Pemberton's face was purple with rage. "This is preposterous. You can't seriously expect us to—" "Richard." The quiet voice came from Margaret Foster, the board's oldest member and largest individual shareholder. At 78, she commanded respect through decades of brilliant business decisions. "I'd like to hear what Sebastian has to say." Sebastian stood, Isadora's hand still clasped in his, drawing strength from her unwavering support. "Margaret, members of the board, 3 days ago, I was a man who measured success by stock prices and quarterly reports. I was efficient, profitable, and completely empty. I built this company into an empire, but I never built anything that mattered." He gestured to the diverse group of supporters filling the room. These people, Maria with her tutoring business, Carmen fighting for workers' rights, David creating technology that solves real problems, they're building things that matter. They're creating value that can't be measured in dollars alone. The question before you today isn't whether I'm fit to be your CEO. I'm not. The old Sebastian Blackthorne who valued conformity over conscience, profit over people, reputation over relationships, that man is dead. He died in a bus terminal, when he finally found something worth fighting for. Sebastian's voice grew passionate, filling the room with conviction. But if you want a leader who believes that business can be a force for good, who thinks that companies should lift up communities instead of exploiting them, who knows that the greatest return on investment is the human potential we nurture, then I'm your man. And if that's not the kind of leadership you want, then we're not the kind of people you deserve. The silence that followed was profound. Even the cameras seemed to hold their breath as the board absorbed Sebastian's words. Margaret Foster was the first to speak. I've been on this board for 30 years. I've seen CEOs come and go, watched this company grow from Sebastian's father's small firm into a global corporation. But I've never seen a leader inspire the kind of loyalty I'm witnessing today. She stood slowly, her arthritis making the movement painful, but her voice strong. I vote to retain Sebastian Blackthorne as CEO, with the understanding that Blackthorne Industries will embrace a new mission focused on sustainable growth and social responsibility. Seconded, said David Morrison, a younger board member who'd been quiet until now. Thirded, added Jennifer Walsh. One by one, the votes came in. When the tally was complete, Sebastian had retained his position by a margin of 7-5. Not because the board feared losing money, but because they'd glimpsed a vision of what business could become when guided by love instead of fear. But the real surprise came when Pemberton stood to leave, his face a mask of controlled fury. This isn't over, he said quietly. You may have won today, but the market doesn't care about your fairy tale. When the quarterly reports come in, when the romance wears off and reality sets in, we'll see how long your idealism lasts. You're right, Sebastian said calmly. This isn't over, it's just beginning. And Richard, you're fired. The collective gasp from the room was audible, but Sebastian's expression was serene. The board voted to keep me as CEO. My first executive decision is to remove any leadership that prioritizes personal profit over corporate responsibility. Your severance package will be generous, but your time here is done. 6 months later, Isadora stood in the kitchen of Elevation Cafe, the community restaurant she'd opened in partnership with Blackthorne Industries' new social responsibility division. The space buzzed with energy as local entrepreneurs met over coffee, students studied for exams, and families enjoyed affordable, healthy meals. "Order up," called James, the formerly homeless veteran who now managed the cafe's morning shift. 2 lattes and a croissant for table 6. Through the large windows, Isadora could see Sebastian across the street, emerging from a meeting with city planners about the affordable housing project that would break ground next month. Their eyes met through the glass, and his smile was radiant, the expression of a man who'd found his purpose. "Boss lady," Carmen called from behind the register. "Your Prince Charming is here." Sebastian entered the cafe like he belonged there, which he did. This place, these people, this mission to build something meaningful. It was home in a way his penthouse had never been. "How did the meeting go?" Isadora asked, accepting his kiss with the easy affection of 2 people who'd built a love strong, enough to reshape the world. "The zoning committee approved the project unanimously," Sebastian replied, his eyes sparkling with excitement. 200 affordable housing units, each with built-in office space for small businesses. We're not just giving people homes, Isadora. We're giving them opportunities. And Blackthorne Industries' stock price? Up 30% from where? It was when Pemberton left. Turns out investors like companies with souls. Sebastian pulled her close, his voice dropping to the intimate tone reserved only for her. But more importantly, how are you feeling about tonight? Tonight, their wedding reception, to be held in this very cafe surrounded by the community they'd built together. They'd gotten married that morning in a small ceremony in Central Park, with Mrs. Rodriguez walking Isadora down the aisle and Maria Santos as maid of honor. "Nervous," Isadora admitted. "Happy, grateful, completely overwhelmed by how much our lives have changed." "Good overwhelmed or bad overwhelmed?" "The best, kind of overwhelmed," she said, standing on her tiptoes to kiss him properly. The kind that comes from getting everything you never dared to dream of. As the sun set over their cafe, their community, their empire built on love instead of fear, Sebastian and Isadora danced to music played by local musicians while their friends, billionaires and bus drivers, board members and baristas, celebrated the wedding of two people who'd proved that fairy tales could come true for those brave enough to rewrite the rules. The newspaper headlines the next morning would read, "From server to CEO's wife, the ultimate Cinderella story." But Sebastian and Isadora knew the truth. This wasn't about a server becoming worthy of a billionaire's love. This was about two people becoming worthy of each other, and in the process, building something more valuable than any empire. A legacy of love that would change the world. 5 years later, Elevation Enterprises had become a model for corporate social responsibility, with programs operating in 12 cities. Sebastian and Isadora's twin daughters, Elena and Sophia, played in the cafe every afternoon while their parents worked to build a better world. And every year on their anniversary, they returned to Port Authority Bus Terminal, not to catch a bus, but to remember the moment they chose love over everything else, and changed not just their own lives, but the lives of thousands of others.